Hey, welcome back. This is part two of laminations. And that boat rocking in front of me is an IXP. And that's what we're going to focus on. IXP is unique. We intend it to be used differently than we do the other boats. It is class 1, 2, 3 whitewater. It is, I want to beat up the boat. We're not trying to save weight on IXP boats. It's not to say we build them as heavy as we possibly can, but it's to say we build them as durable as we possibly can. What makes an IXP boat unique? Well, it's a Negra for one. That's that outer material. In fact, almost the whole boat is built of a Negra. And Negra has excellent impact resistance. In fact, it just wants to dissipate an impact. So when you hit a rock, it just dissipates right away. It has really good abrasion resistance as well. It's impressive what its abrasion resistance is. And then, of course, like any composite, it's got great longevity. So it wins on all those fronts. It is really at the peak of durability across the board, materials, any materials. When Royalex went away, that was right at the beginning of Northstar, and we came across in Negra right about the same time and said, hey, let's try and build a boat. Let's try and make a lamination that'll do what Royalex did, that'll replace Royalex. And this more than replaces Royalex, and we'll talk about that as we get into this a little bit. In order to do that, we eliminated the foam core. Eliminate the foam core. Remember how we talked about on Starlight boats, the foam core is the structure, it's the stiffness. It's a way to create those things, stiffness, without adding weight, or at least significant weight. Eliminate the foam core on a composite, now all of a sudden we have to put in a lot of material in order to create that stiffness again. And we've not only done that, we've even added more material than that. So there's a huge amount of a Negra in this boat. And to give you an idea, a Starlight B16, which is what we're looking at, is 39 pounds. A Blacklight is 41. This is about 60. So 50% heavier than Blacklight. So a huge difference in terms of the weight. That's a big sacrifice if you're going to portage it. But if you want to run rivers, it's not a big sacrifice. We actually add some fairy dust to our high elongation vinyl ester resin to even give it more flexibility, because that's what a Negra can handle. So this is literally a custom lamination for us as well. It's about 10% lighter than a Royalex boat is. So a comparable Royalex boat would be 66 pounds. And then the newest of the thermoplastics on the market is actually a little heavier than Royalex. And so it's probably 10 pounds lighter, just about, than current plastic boats are in the thermoplastic realm. And then let's talk about it. Let's compare it to Royalex, because that's what everybody wants. It's like, how does it compare to Royalex? Well, in short, we've got to think about how other manufacturers, not just Bell, but all the other manufacturers over the years that have built both Royalex boats and composite boats, talk about them. And how do they? Well, they'll say that composite boats are higher performance because they're stiffer, so they're more efficient to paddle. They don't oil can in the center. And so you get maximum performance out of them. And in addition, we can build them with more complex shapes, because composites, there's no limitation from the material on the shape that we can build, whereas in Royalex and the other thermoplastics, you're restricted in terms of the shapes that you can make by the material's properties. And so composites win every which way on the performance side of the world. So when we at Bell would talk about Royalex, it was durability and it was cost. And so the cost is much closer than it used to be, and the durability now is the same or better, and better longevity. So when we were coming out with the B17, the sibling to this guy, the B16, when we were coming out with the B17 and I had the plug, which is, the kind of the test model, it's what we build the mold out of, I took that plug home and paddled it with my wife and my sister and my cousin, and loaded it up and spun circles and heeled it, zoomed down the lake and back paddled with it and, did everything we possibly could to get a feel for how that hull was going to behave in moving water. And then I actually took it out on a river as well. And at the same time, I pulled the Alaskan out of the garage, the old Bell Alaskan that I had, which was at that point about 15 years old. And we paddled that and we compared the two. And it was like, wow, I was getting more and more excited about the B-17, about how it was performing compared to the Alaskan. And then I looked over at the Alaskan and the B-17 when they were on the beach after we were done paddling and we were having a beer, and I noticed just how shallow that Alaskan looked. And the Alaskan was listed at 14 inches. It was 14 inches deep when we built that thing at Bell. And I got a tape measure out and put a tape measure on it, and it was 12 and a half inches. Mine, 15 years old, was 12 and a half inches deep. What happened in that intervening 15 years? That material had flattened out a little bit. It had aged. That's what happens to plastics. Composites will never do that. At least they won't do that for much. It'll take a lot longer for that to happen with the composite. And so that's one comparison to Royalex. Beyond that, what are the other differences? Well, number one, when you hit a rock with a Royalex boat, the Royalex boat gives, and so you don't feel that rock all that much. When you hit a rock with an IXP boat, the boat moves out of the way, and so it's a much bigger hit, noisier hit. It's not a bigger hit, it's just a noisier hit. So you know that you did it more so. But just like Royalex, it slides right off that rock. And so comparisons to Royalex, well, it lasts longer. We've established the longevity side of it. It's got as good of impact resistance. It'll take the same hits. Abrasion resistance, it's got as good of abrasion resistance as Royalex, except it's a composite, which means you can recoat it. And we'll talk about a recoat in just a second here. And now we're going to jump over to my boat, which is that B-17 that's been everywhere around this world. No, just kidding. It has been on the Hayes in Manitoba. It has been on Paddle Home. It's been down the current 11 point in very low water in southern Missouri last October. The Hayes was low water as well, so it has gotten scraped to no end, and of course taken lots of hits in whitewater too. It's seen a lot of abuse. And what do we do at the point where all this abrasion is starting to have an impact, starting to actually go significantly through the hull? We recoat it. And so that's masking tape right along here, paint roller and resin, and I recoat it. What can you do to a Royalex boat to recoat it? Absolutely nothing. Composites last longer. And now, let's just take a look at this hull that has seen 80 days of use and maybe 1,200 miles or thereabouts. So we can see the skid plate starting to burn through. You know, we can see where the Innegra's given way. We can see a little bit of fuzz through there, but not tons. And we're just going to zoom along, try not to go too fast so you get to see. You watch me just kind of hitting the spots where there's some cloth coming out. But you know what? There's so many layers in this boat that a little bit of cloth coming out really doesn't matter at all. There's a little bit of fuzz happening, there. What do we got here? A little bit more fuzz, a little bit more abrasion that's happened. All the way along. Here we are back in the stern. Guess what? There's the skid plate just starting to come through. A little bit of fuzz. You get a good view from the GoPro, I hope. It's not the greatest camera in the world, but it'll work. Probably a good hit right there. It's a fairly short spot where it's been fuzzed. But we're just going to keep going along. You get to see the whole thing. You get to see the wear and tear on an IXP boat. There's a nice long hit. That's probably a rock that just we glanced off of. Another rock that we glanced off of. You get to see some fuzz coming up. But you know what? There's nothing I need to do with this boat right now. I'm just going to keep paddling it. How soon do I have to do something? Well, I suppose if I did another 40-day trip, I might consider a recoat. Depends how hard we beat it up. But you know what? It's going to go for a long time without me needing to do anything average use-wise. And now we'll just show impact for a second. So the other thing, this is the resin-coated aspect of things again. There's a nice sharp spot, by the way. Not sharp, but fuzzy spot. If this was a gel-coated boat and I hit it with a hammer this size, I would crack the gel coat. I would leave it so that the gel coat had a nice spider crack in it or even a piece flaked off. What happens with a resin-coated boat? The camera falls over. What about something bigger? What about something that weighs a couple pounds? So the camera's probably going to jump quite a bit, and I'll stand back a little bit so you can see. Oh, it flipped. That was pretty sweet. Anyway, you can see what an IXP boat will handle. Let's flip it over for a second and see what the interior will look like after that. Actually, heck, let's give it one more. There we are, all flipped over. We were banging it right in the center. So we're just going to zoom all around that area, going over the yoke, looking all around for any spider cracking, any cracks, any white. That's what IXP can handle. It's pretty amazing stuff, and it's superior in many, many ways to plastics. Thanks for listening.